it occurred to me that there was absolutely nobody on the radio playing hard rock and heavy metal. And it was there. It was a force to be reckoned with, and it wasn't being recognized.
Rock, metal, prog, and everything in between. Welcome to this episode of Talkin' Rock with Meltdown. Don't forget to follow the audio-only Talkin' Rock podcast on all podcast platforms. And now, it's time for today's conversation. Here's Meltdown.
There he is, one of my childhood heroes, Charlie the Butcher Kendall. How you doing, Charlie?
I'm wonderful, Mr. Meltdown.
Yeah, good to see him. Great to talk to you.
You have to tell me, first of all, how'd you get that name?
That's a question I get a lot. When I was a kid in school, growing up in Western New York in the 80s, there was a character on Snorton Norton's morning show on 97 Rock.
Great show. Yeah, I did all the IDs for them. Yes, I remember that.
That's right. Yeah, wow. And there was a character called Meltdown Mitch in some way, shape, or form. My friends in school started calling me the Meltdown one. And then when I got on the air, you might know, do you remember Art Wander?
Sure, yeah.
So Art said, just call yourself Meltdown. And that was 35 years ago.
Works.
That's right.
What's worked for you for what, 29 years?
Well, I've been at RIP for 29, but I started in Buffalo. And so my 35th anniversary on the air was last month.
That's wonderful. Fantastic. I got a lot of years on the air, but never at one fucking place. I couldn't stay anywhere.
Yeah, I've been at WRIF since November of 1995. I got my 30th anniversary coming up this year. My father told me, go there and give it 6 months and see what happens.
Well, that's a legendary station, and everybody who is a piece of that legend, from everything I know about it, has stayed there until they were gone, you know? Yeah. Arthur, I knew pretty well from a mutual friend of ours, Bobby Applegate, and I spent a week with him one night, and it was quite an experience.
Yeah, I've been there, that's for sure. But yeah, it's one of my proudest things is that Riff is now 54 years old, and I'm only the second afternoon drive DJ.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it's just Arthur and I. Yeah,
that doesn't happen.
No, it's pretty wild. So. But let's talk about your show, Metal Shop, back on the air. And I got to tell you, I'd be lying if I didn't tell you. As a kid, I mean, that was something I listened to all the time, and having records and stuff. I actually had a couple episodes. I sent my money to 666 Fifth Avenue. I had a Metal Shop T-shirt growing up.
For $8.95, yes.
Yeah, I was. Yeah, that's right. I was a big fan. But for those that never heard of Metal Shop, just explain the show in a nutshell.
In a nutshell, in 1982, it occurred to me that there was absolutely nobody on the radio playing hard rock and heavy metal. And it was there. It was a force to be reckoned with, and it wasn't being recognized. And I talked to David Krebs, who was the manager of AC/DC and Scorpions and Metallica, Aerosmith, yada, yada. And I said, is there a show? He said, no, there isn't. So I developed a show, brief outline, basically called Hard Rock to Heavy Metal, that I developed with David. And the first guest was Sammy Hagar. This is in 1982 when I was at WMMR. And Sammy did it with a friend of mine, Dan Carlisle, another Detroit guy, who did the show because he was living in San Francisco at the time. He did the show with Sammy, and we put it out there for like almost 2 years as a demo. And finally, John McGann, who was a friend of mine, Pittsburgh boy, I believe, he took it to Josh Feigenbaum at MJI Broadcasting, and he was willing to try it. But he had to be convinced. So John took him to see Judas Priest, Madison Square Garden on a sold-out night. That was it. Josh says, I'm in. I'm here. Fine. Let's do this. And so the show hit in February of 1984, and it was right on. The wave had already started. We weren't the beginning of it. The wave happened because kids were on the streets like you were, trading records and trading tapes and in talking back and forth, but it wasn't happening in the media. And Metal Shop just got to be the first thing that got there with everything they wanted. It was and I say this in all honesty, because I know it's true. Metal Shop was a teen magazine for heavy metal freaks.
Exactly. That's right. Yeah.
That's what it was. And that's how we created it for that. And remember, at the time, I'm the program director of WNEW-FM in New York, the biggest, arguably, rock station in the freaking world. And I don't have time to go and do all the interviews. MJI had the resources to get guys out there. Matter of fact, my one of my first producers was Dee Snider's brother, Mark Snider, who went out and got the interviews and, got that in there when we designed it so that I was just the host, not the star. And it wasn't like Eddie Trunk. I was just the guy who was there to facilitate a good time. And I didn't have to spend an enormous amount of time writing and producing it and making it great. But I had a good team. And back then it took like 10 or 15 people, to produce that show of 1 hour every week. Now it takes 3 of us,
right?
Because we've got this, we've got Zoom, we've got all sorts of ways to talk to people. And, I have a lot more free time, so I can actually do interviews and things like that now. And it started because, and this is literal, in 1964, 65, I'm 14 years old. I'm playing For Your Love by the Yardbirds on a 45 on a little local top 40 station that I worked at on weekends. And I played the B-side, which was I'm a Man. And I'm like, man, I like that shit. So all of a sudden, the PD and the owner's son started calling me B-side Charlie because I would always go for the loud one. I would always go for the noisy one. I would somehow play Summertime Blues by Blue Cheer or I'm a Man by the Yardbirds. All of that stuff started back then, and I always loved it.
On accident.
I loved that stuff.
Yeah.
And I always did all the way through all of my career, even though the majority of my career was focused on what we now call classic rock.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, of course.
My heart loved that other stuff that was loud and noisy and irreverent. I enjoyed that stuff because, well, I was too. So, we got the show, we got it going. It started rolling. It was a snowball from hell that ran right into grunge. And we went from 250 stations to 60 because consultants said, you can't say Metal Shop. You can't use the word metal on the air anymore. And the stations were, okay, fine. And I'm like going, guys, you pull the word metal out of it, it's going to be a dead duck. And it was. And my son, who was, I think, 40 at the time, about 15 years ago, said, Dad, Metal Shop, you should bring it back. And I'm like, I don't know, because I'm thinking of it in the old style network thing. And I looked at it and I said, it's going to take quite a bit of money and that's okay. But, I'm not sure how the advertising revenue is, blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden the world changed during COVID. And Zoom became, everybody did Zoom. Everybody was able to do things like this. I had been a Pro Tools fan of, digital audio workstations since the mid 90s, not 1995, because I had a voiceover business and did voiceovers for about 105 radio stations around the planet. And I understood it and I could do it. And I knew that I didn't have to sit over a smoking reel to reel, for days at a time trying to build a show. I could do it in a few hours, in the digital space. And all of a sudden, everything was there and we were able to do it. Corey Harker, who is a fan of Metal Shop, he's a fan of syndication and a fan of radio and a metal fan. He also does Ron Keel's streaming station.
Yeah.
KRFK Radio. Ron effing Keel is what that's for.
Yeah. I never knew that. Okay. Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah. Well, he got to me about trading some shows back and forth because I had tried to buy the complete archive of Metal Shop and found out that when Clear Channel bought MJI Broadcasting, they didn't want to pay for storage, so they told them to throw everything away. So the entire archive went in the river, gone. So everything that's available is what those of us who trade have online, And what I found out also was that Discogs was out there, which is discogs.com. If you're looking for any old shows, any old albums that you can't find, they're on there. A lot of old Metal Shop shows are $400 and $500 a piece.
Yeah.
I was like, shit, I should have saved them all. My son got a copy of everyone from the time he was like 12, and he gave them to his friends. And when he was in the Marine Corps, he was a lifer Marine sergeant. He said, what am I going to do? Carry him around, Dad? They didn't have many record players over in Iraq. And yeah, I understood that later. So it came up, it popped up. Corey Harker was the impetus who pushed it. And he also works with a group of people who salvage old radio shows. And I'm talking everything from Dick Clark, from American Bandstand, Casey Kasem, all the old shows on vinyl and acetate and tape. They salvage as many as they can to try to preserve them. It's a volunteer thing that he does. So he's a freak for it. And he's also technically proficient. And he's a pretty damn good writer, too. And so we've had a real good time. And I think we've managed to maintain the quality. Metal Shop was known for having, people liked it. They enjoyed it. They sat in the parking lot for an hour or 2 hours and listened to it, without stopping on 11. And
that's for sure.
That's what we want now is if they can still do that within the limitations of our short attention span world, then fine. But that's the thing. Also now, I've got it on Mixcloud. So I can listen to the first 20 minutes myself and then pause and go to the bathroom, as old guys got to do from time to time, and come back and pick up where I left off. Well, you couldn't do that when it was on the radio. So now we can do things like that.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. Like it was a music magazine on the radio. Yesterday, I did an interview in this very chair with Lee from the band Pop Evil, and 2.5 hours later, it was picked up by all sorts of rock radio or rock music aggregates. But back in the day, it's like I interview guys all the time from the era, and it's like they would do an interview, and it would show up in a magazine like 3 weeks later.
Yeah, it had a little bit more lag than it does today.
Yeah, no doubt. But the show was fantastic when I was a kid growing up. I got to get that on that Mixcloud. I did see a link for that just a little while ago. How many rock bands have you met that were fans of the show?
Well, for hard rock and metal fans, pretty much all of them, because we were the only outlet for about almost 10 years. There wasn't another national show. And I marvel that they weren't there because, I mean, the U.S. Army and the Navy and the Marines, and Levi's, they came to us. Josh didn't know if he was going to be able to make any money, and all of a sudden, there they were. The advertisers were there, Alice Cooper's showing up in the lobby. It was great, So it worked out fine. As far as now, that's a whole different ballgame. Now I send stuff to Budweiser and they don't answer me. But that's the way it is.
Yeah. No, it's just fantastic just to even sit here and hear your voice and talk to you about those days. When you were just, by the way, MMR is our sister station out in Philadelphia. It wasn't at the time, I don't think, when you had when you were working there, right?
Actually, I was at MMR from 80 to almost 84. And then in August of 83, they shipped me to New York because the station was next to the last in ratings in New York City. Z100 was the bottom of the thing, worst to first. Scott Shannon's thing.
Oh,
They
yeah.
were literally below us, and we were one step above them. That was it. I think we had a .2.
And that was NEW.
Yeah, WNEWFM. It was nothing. I mean, it was just pitiful. And WMMR was a force to be reckoned with. Jeff Pollock put it on the map, did a great job, but he didn't make it as focused on the culture of rock as I thought was necessary. So that's what I did, and we found the Hooters, and we found Robert Hazard and the Heroes, and we found a whole bunch of other local bands. And that worked out great. We became not only a brand in the market, we became a part of the market. Mm-hmm. We were doing block parties, in the Italian sections, and in the we were on South Street, which was the most iconic of the music streets in Philadelphia. We blocked it off. Southside Johnny did a show, and we had 200,000 or 300,000 people out in the streets, and doing a live broadcast. And we did a live broadcast once or twice a week. We were live with a live band somewhere. Wow. So we became integral to the community, and that's still there. I mean, guys like Pierre Robert, he came up to me in a restaurant, a hippie in sandals in the middle of December with a tape going, are you Charlie Kendall? Yeah. And he says, this is my air check. I worked at KSAN, and I'm here in Philadelphia now, and I'm looking for a job. I listened to it, and it was okay. It was pretty good. And we gave him some overnights and some weekends. And the first time I heard him on the air, the first thing I noticed was he was so happy to be there. That jaded crap that jocks can get into. This was the antithesis of that. And I went, this guy's got something. He was a fan. He made the fans a fan of, and it worked out beautifully. And he's been there, 45 years?
Oh, you're the one that gave him his start?
Yep.
Wow.
Yep. Yeah, he did overnight weekends, 2 nights a week for about a year. And then we gave him a Saturday shift. And that was right before I went to New York. Gave him a Saturday shift, prime time, 10 to 3, which is your biggest, I'll use a radio term, cum day part of the week. Saturday, 10 to 3 for a rock station in 1983. And he did that and exploded, just blew up. And within a year, he was doing middays, and he stayed there.
Yeah, ever since. Yeah.
He's like me. He's like you. He's smart, unlike me, who floated around like a freaking gypsy.
That's debatable, and not many people say that about me. But then it's funny. You said you go to New York to NEW. I remember Gene Simmons from Kiss telling me, he goes, "There's never been a huge rock band that's come out of New York." He goes, "Go ahead, think about it. An arena band. You got the Ramones and whatnot, but it is kind of strange, isn't it?"
It was totally strange, but Scott Muni, Things from England was his big show, his big feature on his show on 3 to 7 in the afternoon. And that was Friday afternoon, 4 o'clock, Things from England. Here's the guy who brought us Cream. Here's the guy who brought us, he was there when the Beatles came in. He was covering it along with, Cousin Brucey and all those guys. So Things from England became his thing. Elton would come wearing a dress. Scott would wear a dress, which was really a sight to behold. And they would sit in the studio and talk to each other, in drag. It was hilarious. It was great. It was great radio. And that's what he was about. Pete Fornatel, bless his heart, he loved Poco. He liked John Prine. Yeah. That none of these people were real rock people. Allison was to a degree, but everything else was more eclectic. And that's how they ended up second from the bottom. The first thing I did that I noticed, I'm coming in there and I look at what's been played, because we wrote down what we played back then, because there was no computer to tell you what to play. And I'm going, does anybody ever play any ZZ Top? And they're like, yeah, they're okay, but they're a Texas band. I'm going, no, they're not. They're a They're a fucking American band. What are you, you know? And they're about to explode. You know, nobody was cognizant or watching what was happening. You know, nobody was playing AC/DC. Nobody was playing ZZ Top. Nobody was really playing Van Halen. It was, you know, it was sad, but it made my job real easy. Inject some rock and roll and watch this guy take off, and it did. You know, we pulled it out of the drain as it was slowly about to go down, and pulled it back to the top. Made it top 5.
Did you work in radio anywhere besides the East Coast?
Oh,
voice stuff.
Oh, you want to hear it?
Maybe I don't. I don't know. Go ahead.
I'm a kid from Mississippi, Clarksdale, Mississippi, birthplace of the blues. I was playing a guitar from the time I was about 10. And I loved blues and I liked hard rock. U.S. Navy term, first job was mornings in Indianapolis on a progressive station, WNAP. And that's 1970. They shipped me to Boston, WVBF. My first gold record's on the wall behind me here. It's Aerosmith, their first album. I saw them at, what was it? A little armory, Newton, Mass Armory. It was Duke and the Drivers, Aerosmith, and the headline band was the New York Dolls. And Duke and the Drivers were good. They were a good band, but Aerosmith blew me away. They were outstanding. And they were so loud that, of course, the Dolls had to get louder. And when you're in an armory that's nothing but 10, and they're on 11, it was painful. I think people were bleeding. So I had a great time there for about 4 years. MMS calls, mornings in Cleveland. Gotta go, gotta do it. You know, we did great there for a couple of years, and then KZEW in Dallas calls and said, hey, you can do anything you want, come do mornings here. Did that for a couple of years, and then KWST, Century Broadcasting, calls and says, come to LA. Well, okay. Did that for a couple of years, and that's where I discovered something. There were no translators, and people that don't know anything about the radio mechanics won't understand this, but they were supplemental transmitters for radio stations that filled in mountainous regions. Well, when they weren't there in 1977. So I get to LA. The station's got, I don't know, 40, 50,000 watts, but it has a short tower, and it doesn't get into the San Fernando Valley, which is where everybody lives. You know, most of the people, the biggest number of diaries, they were over there. We didn't come in there at night. So when the sun went down and people crossed the mountains to go home, you couldn't get K-West. We were great during the day, you know, but my shift, you know, about 8 or 9 was finally there's some numbers coming in there. And I realized that it really does help to have a signal.
Yeah, right.
You know, everywhere I had ever worked didn't have mountains. You know, the Mississippi Delta was flat. Indianapolis was flat. Boston, flat. Cleveland, flat. I'd never seen it before. And there, I got this offer to go be a program director at WBCN. Here's another station. My first job as a program director. I had been a music director before that. And they were dead, circling the drain, you know, dead in the water. And they said, fix it. Mark Parento was working at WCOZ, speaking of my Detroit connections. And he was doing well, but the station wasn't. But they were beating BCN. I talked to Mark. I get him to come over to WBCN, do afternoon drive, and show those laid back, you know, hippie disc jockeys how to fucking rock. And he did, you know, and they did. And we went top 5, and thank you very much. Then they sold the station out from under me and, you know, screwed me on my bonus, you know, the whole typical radio routine.
Right,
Yeah. And then suddenly I'm at WMMR in Philadelphia, and then New York, and then Miami. And then I went and bought my own stations back in Mississippi, the one I started at. I bought a couple of those down there. Um, did that for 8 years. It was interesting. I enjoyed it, but it's the same amount of work for a station in a town of 25,000 as it is in a town with 25 million. It's the same amount of work, and it's a whole lot different money.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And so I ended up saying, yeah, this is fun, but I'm going to go back and play, because I had also gotten sober during that time. But I waited 5 years until I was 5 years sober before I went back to try it again. And a guy named Lynn Martin calls me and says, come fix my South Carolina station, 98 Rock in Charleston.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I fixed that, and then I ended up being the PD for 15 of his stations before that was all over. But not, of course, before I ended up in Phoenix back as a disc jockey when an internet thing I did fell apart right after 9/11. We had 18 million in financing lined up. 9/11 happens and the finance disappears. So I'm sitting there, and Joe Bonadonna, who was the afternoon guy at WMMR, was he was in Phoenix. And he calls and says, what are you doing? I'm going, looking for work. He said, well, I got a midday job and a creative production job, and I'll pay you X amount, which was a pretty good amount. And I said, okay, fine. So I go there and I do that. And the station had done well, but suddenly I was number one, within about 9 months.
Hmm.
So they moved me from, you can't see it, 93.3 KDKB.
Oh.
Yeah, this isn't the one with the thing on it. They moved me from that one to the sister station, KSLX, to do mornings. I didn't realize that they moved me because they wanted me to be a one-man morning show. So I'm there. There's somebody who's already replaced me, and I'm like going, I can't do this by myself. There are no one-person morning shows that are winning.
Right. Yeah.
It doesn't happen. They're not out there. Well, we want you to try it. I'm going, I'm dead. And it ended up being a little different from that. I had a problem with my left arm, and a nurse gave me a shot in my left arm that killed my radial nerve. It was Toradol, which they give to sports guys and different things like that when they have pain, because I can't do any oxy. I couldn't do any of that shit. Right. So they gave me the Toradol. It was supposed to be in my butt. They gave it to in my arm, and it killed this arm. So I'm a one-armed morning guy.
A one-armed, one-man morning guy.
Yes. And I would say at the end of my show every day, well, I'll be here tomorrow, if good Lord's willing, and they don't fire me. And I'm waiting, because the show's not working. It's not happening. We moved from 17 to, I think, 8th or 9th, but it wasn't going to go any higher than that, and I knew it, and I knew that wasn't their expectation. Not to mention the fact that this arm was, I didn't know what to do. So I said, time to go back to programming. And I end up back working for Lynn Martin here in Lexington, Kentucky, where I am now. And
is that where you are? Okay.
Yeah. And I'm working for him. I'm running 15 stations, but I can do that with one arm. The arm came back. It took about 3.5 years, of constant work and maintenance. And it's still not perfect. It's still only about 60%. So that's my tour. You asked for it.
Now, this is a stupid question. Are you in the Radio Hall of Fame?
Hell no.
Okay, really? Now, see, that's with that resume, I mean, it'd almost be like a given.
I was never in one place long enough to really build up a seat of power. Now, the thing that I know you understand from 35 years at the same station.
Well, 29 here, yeah, but 35 in the business, yeah.
Okay, 35 in a minute, 29, same station. That means something. That gives you clout to do things you want to do and not have to put up with a lot of BS. especially when I was drinking, I didn't, put up with bullshit. I would go, no, fuck you. Get out of my face. I'm not doing it. And of course that ended up with problems. The weird thing is somebody else asked me, how many times were you fired? I said, once. I said, but I could smell it coming. So I got another job. That's how it was done back then.
Mm-hmm.
You do that now, you're a floater.
Yeah.
Back then it was like, I'm moving to a better city at a better station for more money. It was real easy. It was, not much of a hard decision.
Yeah, back in the day for sure. Well, Metal Shop is up and cranked, and give us that website address one more time where people can listen to it.
ckmetalshop.com.
Okay, CK Metal.
Charlie Kendall's Metal Shop, ckmetalshop.com.
I have a friend in Lexington. We may have to meet up for lunch one day or something, man. I'm going to be heading down to Nashville coming up here in a few weeks. So, but
it's a great town. I mean,
been there.
I love this town. It has all of the aspects of a city that I love, and yet it's got rural qualities. If I go anywhere, I'm driving through one of the 250 thoroughbred horse farms that are around here. This is the thoroughbred capital of planet Earth, right here.
That's awesome. Right in the heartland of America.
People think it's like Kentucky. That's southern, isn't it? I'm an hour south of Cincinnati.
Right.
Yeah. That's not southern.
No, not at all. Well, Charlie, it's really an honor to talk with you here. They're going to shut me off here in a second, but I just wanted to say thanks for all the Metal Shop memories, and thanks for being an inspiration in my career all those years ago, and listening to the show and being just inspired and playing all that music that I grew up on. And I just had a chance to, for the first time ever, to meet Blackie Lawless a few months ago. I've interviewed him before here and there.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Another guy like I discovered on.
He's larger than life. He's just
great.
He's Blackie.
Right. I've met I mean, I could go down the list of bands that I heard on Metal Shop that not only do I know, I've become friends with. I've interviewed a bunch of times. So I got my podcast on hundreds of episodes, with all sorts of artists. But thanks for everything and good luck with Metal Shop.
Well, thank you. It's our pleasure, and hopefully you can talk to the PD about putting it on Riff.
I will do that. Thanks, Charlie.
Okay, be good.